You're listening to the Book Nerd Podcast, a virtual book club for readers of mystery, thriller and suspense novels. Twice a month I will bring you a short discussion about what makes a great thriller novel, as well as latest reads over a cup of tea. And who am I? I'm your host, cozy mystery writer and thriller author Amelia D. Hay. Hello book lovers. I've never been the type of reader who solely read in a single genre of fiction. I'm a little eclectic when it comes to reading. How bad am I? Basically, if the cover pulls me into the story, then I'll read it. I guess you could say I'm a bibliophile, and this is why I created this podcast. For those of you who are just like me, who are bibliophiles that will read anything that's page-turning. The Book Nerd Podcast is a virtual book club that comes out every second Sunday. Each episode will be a maximum of 20 minutes long. I want to make each episode short and be respectful of your time because I get it, you're busy and you may not have a spare hour to listen to a podcast. And this podcast is a relaunch of one of my older podcasts, The Thriller Novel Nerd. It faded at the beginning of 2020 after episode 6. To be honest, I felt constrained by the name of the podcast, and then the lockdown happened. Since then, I've had a rethink about what I want to achieve and figured out how to work from home with my husband, manage my writing and podcasting. So what's different about this version of the podcast? The main difference between the Book Nerd and Thriller Novel Nerd is I've ditched the video episodes along with recording in stereo. These changes should fix the sound issues, and I'm now recording in seasons. Each season of the podcast will have 13 episodes scheduled to go live every 2 weeks. Fingers crossed this will help me to achieve a better writing and podcasting balance. So who will enjoy this podcast? As suggested by the title, this podcast is for book lovers passionate about the mystery, thriller and suspense genres. If you love discussing what makes a good thriller novel or just looking for your next read, then this podcast is for you. What can you expect from this podcast? I want every episode of this podcast to feel like a chat about a great fiction novel over a cup of tea. In essence, it's a virtual book club. Just in case you're wondering, you won't hear me slurping away at a cup of tea. I promise I'll hit the mute button. Actually, that's a huge pet peeve of mine, listening to people on webinars or podcasters who will take a drink during an episode. Actually, even on live Instagram and YouTube live videos, it really annoys me when people don't hit the mute button while they drink, because you hear this really awful sort of slurpy sound, and it's just, I guess I've got some sound hang-ups. There are certain sounds that I can't actually stand. The slurping sound is one of them, and the crinkling of plastic packaging. It's enough to drive me up the wall. As a guide, here is a short list of the types of content that you can expect from the show. Number 1, book hauls with links to the books and blog posts for these episodes. 2, an honest review of books that I'm currently reading with no sponsored book reviews. So over on my author website for my Reporter Mystery series, I get a lot of submissions or emails from authors asking me to review their book because I think they're not reading my About Me page, and I think they assume because I do book reviews that I'm a book blogger, and those two things are very different beasts. One person wants to receive free books in exchange for a review, and the other just really isn't interested, and tragically, I'm the uninterested type. Because with this podcast, I want to talk about the books that I find and read that I'm interested in, and talk about what I liked and didn't like about the book without the pressure of feeling like I have to give someone a good review. Because when you do get books submitted to you, you do feel obliged to give a good review, I think, because I'm aware of what a bad review can do to a relatively new author. But back to the list of what you can expect from this podcast. 3, interviews with authors who write in the mystery, thriller, suspense and crime genres. 4, the occasional rant about what I don't like in a book. Number 5, book versus movie or book versus show series. And I know that sounds self-explanatory, self-explanatory, but just in case you're not sure what I mean, for instance, there are a lot of TV shows and movies out there that have been adapted from an original work, like a book or a short story in the case. Actually, it was a novella. In the case of Arrival, that was adapted from a novella, so it's still a book. I'm interested in doing a mini series on book versus movie or book versus TV show. So I'm really interested in talking about the Dan Brown books, because it's a guilty pleasure. Some people really bag out those books, but I secretly like them, and I don't know if I secretly like them. I'm not going to give an excuse. I just really like those books, and I'm interested in doing a book versus movie on those things, as well as the Agatha Raisin TV series. I do have some thoughts about that I want to explore on this podcast, because I have a funny feeling there will be other people out there who may feel the same way I do. And number 6, the occasional piece of bookish news. But I'm only going to share things that I feel are super important, or things that I'm looking forward to, especially in terms of new TV shows or movies based on adaptations, that type of bookish news. I started this podcast because I wanted to create a place where I could discuss what makes a great mystery novel and discuss my latest reads with other fans of the mystery, thriller, or suspense genres. And I want to find and connect with people who are just like me. Now that I've said that, I have actually created a Facebook group around this podcast where we can continue the discussion after and between episodes. It's called the Book Nerd Reader Club, and you can join the group by going to facebook.com/groups/book nerd podcast. Now that I've read that URL out, I realize that it's super long and very confusing. I'll leave a link to the Facebook group and the blog post for this episode in the show notes in your favorite podcasting app. If you love novels within the mystery, thriller, and suspense genres, and if this sounds like the podcast for you, then click the subscribe button and listen to the next episode. And make sure you connect with me on social media. All of the links where you can find me online are in the show notes, along with links to any books mentioned in the episode. If you want to ask a question or have a suggestion for a future episode, then come on over to my Cozy Mystery Writer website and fill out the contact form on the contact page and leave an idea that you have for a future episode of this show, and I'll get back to you and let you know if it's actually possible, because sometimes it may not be. If you want me to interview your favorite author, because I'm such a small podcast, maybe authors won't be interested in being interviewed on my podcast until I've got such a substantial audience. But I guess my point is I will reply back to you and let you know that I've received it, and I'll let you know what I'm doing with that idea and if I'm going to work towards it, and if I'm not, the reasons why. For instance, if the author you want me to interview hasn't written back to me, then I'll let you know that I've sent them an email and I'm just waiting back. Thanks for listening, and happy reading, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Book Nerd Podcast. If you're new to this podcast or want to be notified about more episodes just like this, then click the subscribe button right now. You can find episode show notes and lots more information at ameliadhay.com/book-nerd. I'm your host, Amelia D. Hay, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time for another episode. Happy reading, everybody.